life here on Earth is as coincidental as a snowflake on Pluto. And if you can't accept that, then, you know, maybe you can't accept that we're a spawn from evolution and not some superior being.
That doesn't escape the fact, sir, that the universe has a beginning. Everything that has a beginning has a cause.
But I don't understand how that's
Actually, we don't know the universe has a beginning.
The Big Bang points us to the fact
That does not mean it has a beginning.
But it's a theory. There's other theories out there about the universe.
it's the most commonly accepted theory of
That doesn't mean
astronomers.
it's correct. Well, why?
I know, but you're asking me for evidence. And I'm telling you, as I observe reality, as I look at the evidence is at this point it could change tomorrow. But the evidence at this point is the Big Bang occurred about 15 billion years ago. And there is a beginning to this universe. Well, like it or not, guys, just look at reality around you that you can observe. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. If there's a Big Bang from the other side of this building, and you say what to me, you ask me, hey Cliff, what happened? And I say, oh, nothing. That's ridiculous. Something caused the bang on the other side of this building. You don't have something that has a beginning without a cause.
That's not going to
That's
be
what
a
the Big Bang
scientific explanation for the cause. Doesn't mean we want to explain it in the future.
You have to make it happen.
I mean, look at things like rain. You know, when rain wasn't explained, we had gods to explain rain.
I'm
And
not,
then now it's disproven later.
Your
I'm
gods of
not
the gaps
postulating a god of the gaps. It's not the point.
You briefly explained how, like, just because obviously it has a beginning, it has a cause, but why does that make it invalid? Why does that just take the validity away from the theory? What does that have to do with the whole theory in general? It has a cause, yes. No one's debating that. The Big Bang is what caused the universe.
Right. All right. Because the universe is not eternal,
Okay.
Albert Einstein began to realize
We don't know.
there are consequences. One of the consequences that Einstein realized was pantheism is not true. Einstein was into pantheism, the idea that nature is God. You see, the guy who really pushed the Big Bang, who really discovered it, Arno Penzias, when he discovered the background noise. Penzias understood, as a result of the Big Bang, this is theism coming right at us out of science. And Penzias understood God exists. Because the universe does have a beginning, you have to ask, what is the most plausible, the most reasonable explanation for what caused the Big Bang?
Two particles. So why does God have the ability?
Well, the guy who discovered the Big Bang said no.
Radical expansion of gas.
Where did God come from? We answer God. So
Arno Penzias and Albert Einstein realized there's got to be a creator. There's got to be an intelligent mind. Why? Because when that Big Bang occurred, if the expansion would have been a little bit faster, or if it had been 1% faster or 2% slower, we wouldn't be here.
That's what makes it so miraculous. That's
But
why
we
it's
are
so
here.
small.
Good. And here's the simple thing
But I don't
rationally.
think that gives validity.
If it's
to
a
the
miracle, you got to have a miracle maker. If it's a miracle,
I use
you
the
got to have a
term
miracle maker.
I don't think you're using the Big Bang Theory correctly, because doesn't the Big Bang Theory say that the universe, the energy in the universe is infinite and it expands and contracts on itself an infinite number of times?
No.
Is that not the Big Bang
No,
Theory?
the oscillating universe theory is not part of the Big Bang.
Okay.
Carl Sagan bought into the oscillating universe theory, but he didn't have any evidence to support it.
There's no evidence to support the Big Bang Theory.
There's no evidence to support the Big Bang theory. Why don't you go tell that to your astronomy department?
Okay.
All right. Now, the question then becomes for me, in light of the fact that the evidence points to some type of God existing, who is this God? That's where Muhammad, the avatars of Hinduism, Jesus Christ, Shirley MacLaine, enter the picture. They all claim to be revealing God accurately, but they contradict each other. So they're either all wrong, or one of them is right. But they're not all right because they contradict each other. Now, that's why I plead with you guys, read the Quran. Ask yourself, does the evidence point to Muhammad being a reliable source of information about God? But also read the New Testament Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And ask yourself, does the historical evidence of the way he lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead point to Jesus Christ being a reliable source of information about God? You decide for yourself.
I have.
And what's been your decision?
I'm a self-professed atheist, I guess. More somewhat agnostic, I guess. I wouldn't be disappointed if there were a God. Of course, nobody would.
I would be.
Okay.
And you should be.
Okay, now wait a second. What I've heard you say, wait a second, am I correct in understanding the reason that you're an atheist is because the evidence is lacking for God's existence?
Correct. In my mind.
Right. Okay, so now, what are you living for? And what is the evidence that whatever it is you're living for is reliable?
Well, I'm living for this, like, I guess we talk about Darwin, the survival of the species. I guess to procreate would be the short answer.
You're living to procreate?
Yes.
Okay, now what's the evidence that the purpose of human existence is to procreate?
Lots.
The Bible.
You're assuming that
It's the same of any other species.
No, he has a faith. And his faith statement is crystal clear.
It is not faith.
Absolutely his faith.
It's absolutely
He
not
has a
faith.
worldview that says the reason I'm here is to procreate.
No, that's...
Yes, that's a faith statement.
I agree with.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for thinking with me.
That makes sense.
You can understand how frustrating
I
it gets
have
for me
faith in science.
dealing with some people who don't want to think.
That makes sense.
Good. All right. You got faith, right?
In science.
In science, exactly.
Whatever you take faith in, you have to. I mean, it only makes sense.
But it's not faith, though. Because faith is belief without evidence. There's
Look,
evidence
it's still
for
faith,
science.
though. Still faith
No,
in
it's
science.
No, it's not. It's not faith in
Science is
science.
not.
Because science is unjustifiable.
By the Webster's definition of faith, and you may not claim that it is, but really, I personally agree with that. I do have faith.
Thank you for your honesty.
I have a question though.
Okay, well, let me finish with him and then I'll get to you, man. All right. My point is, though, now, what I want you to do is tonight, could you go back and remember this dialogue, this part of it? I asked you why you can't believe in God. And you said because of lack of evidence. Okay, I have to respect that. But then I've asked you, what are you living for, and what is the evidence that what you are living for is true? Now, what I asked you to do is compare the evidence for the existence of God with the evidence that the purpose of human existence is to procreate.
The same, kind of, in the sense that your logic is not infallible, nor is mine. And you can't, like you said earlier, you can't prove that God exists. And I to this point in time, I can't prove that my only job is to procreate.
You bet.
And I mean, the two will never go hand in hand. And you're welcome. I mean, everybody's welcome to believe what they will. Obviously,
Sure.
I never
We
want
respect
to
anybody's right to believe anyone.
tread on anyone's
All right.
opinion. But I mean, I guess it's kind of the same way that I could turn the question on you and ask you the same thing, and you profess that you can't prove that God.
Yes.
No, right. But I say that here's the evidence.
My
True,
phone.
I guess. Yeah,
Right? Now, I have no problem with you saying, I'm sorry, Cliffe, it's not enough evidence. My problem is the following. You've communicated to me, Cliffe, the reason I can't believe is because lack of evidence. So now what I want to hear from you is this overwhelming evidence that indeed the purpose of life is to procreate. Because if you can't produce that evidence, then you know what I've got to conclude about you, right? Well, you got an incredible double standard, right?
That's true.
Incredible double standard. In fact, you're guilty of intellectual hypocrisy. Because what you're saying to me is, Cliffe, the reason I can't believe that God exists is because of lack of evidence. But then, what I'm living for right now has nowhere near the evidence. But I'm choosing to anyway.
Because he hasn't thought out his argument as well as you have, it doesn't mean he's wrong.
Yeah, there is
I am aware of that. But I hope you realize the potential here for some incredible intellectual hypocrisy when a person says to you, all right, let's say I say to you, why do you believe what you do? And you give me evidence. And I say, well, it's not enough. Then I think you have every right to look me in the face and say, okay, fine. Then as a fellow searcher after truth, what are you living for? And what's all this preponderance of evidence that convinces you that whatever it is you're living for is true? Right? It's just being fair, right?
Of course, it's only
Right. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Oh, you were saying that like based on the historical evidence, which religion is actually true, and I would argue that it really depends on what culture you're from. because each culture, like in India, has historical evidence. The Vedas predate Christian thinking. So for them, there's a lot of historical evidence that their version is true. So why can't all of them have an element of truth, and all of them have an element that says that is not accurate? Because what you're saying is that there's more evidence that Christian religion is correct. Okay? How much do you really know about Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism to base the idea that somehow our Western perspective is automatically correct? I'm assuming that you've grown up here, you've been told that it's correct, and the historical information you've been given is true. However, there's a lot of differences in historical interpretation. We have a King James Bible, then we have this Bible, then we have that Bible, so there's a lot of discrepancies in historical context. So I'm not saying that yours is necessarily wrong. I'm arguing that all of them can have an element of truth, that it's a psychological need to have spirituality, so there's not really a right or wrong answer.
So what I hear you saying is, Cliff, the bottom line reason that you're a follower of Christ is because of your culture.
Well, that's right.
Right?
Right.
Okay. If I say to you, I believe that 2 + 2 = 4, is that cultural also?
Well, I mean, if you grew up in India right now, you'd be standing here arguing that Brahma is supreme.
Okay, just listen to what you just said to me. I don't see how you could believe what you just said to me. Cliff, if you had grown up in India, what you would be saying now is Brahman is the truth. Ma'am, how on earth do you know that?
I know lots of people from
Statistically, it's
India.
Pardon?
I know lots of people from India.
Right, now, ma'am, I'm convinced you have articulated very clearly something that's very culturally accepted in our country today, which is, I believe what I believe because of my culture. And I would argue that's a genetic fallacy argument. I would argue that I don't think it has anything to do with my genes or anything with my culture. I think that I'm still a human being with a free will, with a mind. And I believe in Jesus Christ, not because mommy and daddy told me to, not because America told me to, but because I made a free decision of the will after looking at the evidence to trust in Jesus Christ.
But how objectively did you look at evidence in other countries before you say that your choice was better? That's all I'm saying. It's like before you decided of all of these options, this one is the best and has the most evidence. Did you really read historical context of the other religions? I mean, all I'm arguing, I'm not saying, well, your choice is wrong. I make my choice, you make your choice. But before I ever say, I don't like Islam, it's bad. Okay, or it's not true, there's no basis to it at all, I have to question myself and what makes me insecure about somebody else's beliefs.
And I would also plead with you to ask yourself, is not what I've stated out here self-refuting? Because what I've heard you say to me is, Cliff, your belief is simply the result of your culture. Are you not just laying your cultural bias now on me? I mean, are you sure that what you're saying is true? Or have you just been blinded by your culture?
I'm from the same culture as you. I'm from here. I'm not an international student.
You're contradicting me, which is fine, no problem. But notice the contradiction. No, notice what you're saying. You are so provincial, you're so limited by your culture that you've chosen to believe in Jesus. Would you be willing to say the same about yourself? That you are so provincial, so bounded by your culture that what you believe is simply culturally determined? Or are you telling me that you are so intellectually objective that you have separated yourself from your culture and you're having pity on this guy who is culturally blind?
Oh, I don't think.
No, what are you saying? Tell me honestly.
I did recognize before that my mindset is very, like, I raised going to church, and a lot of things kind of didn't make sense to me, so I started reaching out and just looking at other perspectives and saying, okay, what other truth is there? And I came to the conclusion that there's not one truth. There's one that I feel more comfortable with, or maybe a couple I feel more comfortable with, but there's not a single truth. So I did examine my cultural perspective, and then I made a choice on my religion, because I realized it fulfills a psychological need for me as much as it does for everybody else. It's not whether one is true or another is untrue. I don't need somebody to be wrong for me to feel like my decision is correct. That's all.
Are you correct in that?
I certainly feel I'm right.
Okay. Now, is that truth that you're so wedded to? That all religions are simply a psychological crutch to help you deal with your insecurities? Are you absolutely convinced that that's true?
It's a very intellectual way of looking at it. It's part of the truth.
Yeah, but man, don't you see how you are refuting yourself? Because what you're saying is, you're saying to me, Cliff, you hold to this truth, but really you're blind. Now, when you tell me that I'm blind, what you're doing is you're making an incredible truth claim. And your truth claim is, from my perspective, I see that all the religions that contradict each other are all essentially the same. And my perspective is true, and all these other people, be they Muslim, Christian, Jew, Hindu, are wrong. That's an amazing claim you're making.
But you're saying that they're not true based on historical evidence.
I guess for me,
And I'm saying that historical evidence is relative. That it's been altered and changed by so many people, and it doesn't matter what country you're from. You know, Hinduism has changed. It predated Jesus. It's going to keep going, and as people modernize, we shift in our thinking of what is right and what's wrong. We throw things out of the Bible. You can't stone somebody to death for adultery anymore. Okay, so that was something that did exist that was altered. So to say one is right over the other based on historical evidence, I'm saying historical evidence has been altered and is therefore relative. And you will use historical evidence to support your decision.
Just like you just did.
Of course, but that doesn't make me right, nor does it make anybody else wrong. Just like it doesn't make you wrong. You are.
Right. So for all you know, the Muslim militant terrorist might be correct. That's his perspective coming out of his culture, right?
His culture doesn't say that's right.
Oh, but that is absolutely wrong. There are definitely people groups that buy into jihad as being not just a spiritual jihad, but a physical jihad.
There's a lot of crazy people that are... I mean, the Ku Klux Klan supports it.
And did the Crusaders say that the Bible was correct?
Yeah, right.
Oh, but we don't talk about that.
Right,
We talk about that? Absolutely we talk about
But you
that.
didn't. You went right. You pandered to the fears of the American people by bringing up
did
Islam.
not
That's why you
at all.
chose the Islamic militant. You know it, and I know it.
And like the
You're
Ku
wrong.
Klux Klan.
You don't know. You don't know what's going on inside. I mean, that's the most judgmental statement that's been made out here today.
be fair-
You don't know what's motivating me. I don't know what's motivating
I know
you.
what's
Okay?
motivating you.
You make some incredibly judgmental statements. You're amazing to pull that one off.
Why did you bring up the Islamic militant example then? Of all the
Because it's the first one that came to mind. That's
Why was it the first one?
Because I live outside of New York City, and I've been to Ground Zero many times with guys weeping over their dead friends. That's why emotionally it came to my mind. Okay, it has nothing to do with
It does pander.
And culturally,
bias against Muslims.
That
Okay?
particular example may
taking that
pander, but I
social-
was here earlier when you mentioned the Hitler, Hitler's example. You mentioned that they used Christianity for the same purposes.
Right.
You mentioned I'm
Religion
just saying
is
you
being
were objective about it.
manipulated
You
to
did
back
give
up.
Of course
examples
I do.
that you just for his
Be the
reference.
Salem
He
witch
did
trials?
mention that earlier. He
See,
did.
you
He
gotta
isn't
listen,
just
Mike. You're not
pandering
thinking
about
with me.
Sorry, I was learning actual stuff in my class.
Well, then
Sorry
why are you
about
wasting your time out here?
that. Because it's not fair for someone like you to sit down here on your proverbial soapbox and just talk. It's stupid. It's ridiculous.
Oh, you mean these people are not intelligent enough to think for themselves?
You're saying they're not. You've made
Baloney, they're all intelligent enough to think for themselves. I've been an excellent. This guy's an atheist. I respect this guy highly. He has articulated very clearly why he's an
Earlier,
atheist.
he kept saying that people's thought processes were childish because they weren't going along the same lines of rationality he was. How quickly we forget that.
I have accused people of not thinking rationally at times. That's correct, and I'll stand by that.
Oh,
And I told
now
him
that's
he's an
contradicting
atheist,
what you just
but he has
said.
been very consistent with me, and I respect him highly. We obviously disagree very strongly, but he's been very reasonable with me. Genesis chapter 1 is not seeking to answer the question, how long did God take to create? How did God create? What process did God use to create? It is silent. Genesis does not answer the question, what process did God use to create? What does Genesis 1 answer? It answers the question, who created? It says, in the beginning God, not in the beginning hydrogen, which is radically different from the creation account taught by many people here at this fine university. And the second question it answers is, why did God create? What's the purpose of God making us? But in answer to the question, how did God create? What process did God use to create? It's not there.
One of the things that theory of evolution says is that humans came from apes.
Yeah.
And my understanding of what's written in the Bible is that humans were created in the image of God. Now, does that mean that we were created separately from apes, or is that a contradiction, or just you could?
Bottom line is, the Bible teaches you're not an ape. You're a human being created in the image of God. Did God use apes to create people? I don't know. But I can promise you, nobody has proven that. It's a theory. It's got a little bit of evidence to support it, but I sure would underline little. I think it's highly questionable. You give me solid evidence for it, and I'll accept it.
So the idea of macroevolution versus microevolution, then?
Yeah.
Is what you're saying?
I think there's a ton of evidence for microevolution, but where's the evidence for macroevolution? This is what helps me understand that. Charles Darwin did a great job breeding pigeons. And Charles Darwin took those gray, ugly birds and breeded them to the point where they had magnificent displays of feathers. They were gorgeous. Then Darwin extrapolated. And this is where I think he made a big mistake. He extrapolated that if I can breed pigeons and change the way they look in just a few years, just think what could happen over thousands and millions of years. Well, I wish Charles Darwin would have gone to a breeding farm with a farmer who raises cattle, pigs, horses. I don't care how long you have. You're never going to be able to breed a horse coming from a pig, or a cow coming from a mule. Why? Because of the limits in the genetic pool. See, all Darwin did was take animals with the same genetic pool and emphasize certain qualities. But this whole idea that you can take an animal that has a limited genetic pool and breed a pig out of a horse, it's impossible because of the limits of the genetic pool. So that would be an example of a question that I would have for someone who would insist we came from apes who came from fish. Really? Is that really supported by a lot of evidence? I have not seen that evidence yet. But microevolution? Tons of evidence to support microevolution. So obviously microevolution occurs. Macro? Wow. It seems to me there's an agenda behind almost every person I've talked to who insists about macroevolution being true. And that agenda is to justify their atheism. That's scary, because that's intellectually dishonest. The question is, what does the evidence point to? And if the evidence points to macroevolution being true, great. But if there's no evidence to really support it, I'm not going to believe it just because I want to justify my philosophy.
Isn't the whole idea behind macroevolution that it's a microevolution over thousands and thousands and thousands of years? And with your point with you can't get a cow to come out of a pig, that's because, like, yes, as you said, there's restrictions in the gene pool.
Right.
However, if you look at the gene pool between Homo sapiens and apes, there are an extremely large amount of similarities, which means microevolution over time turning into macroevolution would lead to us as Homo sapiens.
Okay.
So there's your evidence.
I would insist that's minimal, but if you want to accept that as evidence, fine.
I could do more research tonight if you're coming back tomorrow, and I could have this huge thing for you if you wanted. But I mean, I don't think you should completely throw out the idea of evolution when there is evidence that supports it. Your idea of a pig coming out of a cow or a cow coming out of a pig is completely different than a human and an ape, because we are more similar than a cow is to a pig.
If you listen carefully to what I said, I pointed out that Darwin extrapolated from his experiments with pigeons to macroevolution. My point is, I don't think he had enough evidence to back up that extrapolation.
Darwin in his book never even mentioned the word evolution.
But his whole point is that in the same way that he saw pigeons adapt the way they did, so take thousands of years, and he was convinced that we could adapt in amazing ways. And the question I raised is, Darwin, you saw tremendous adaptation within a particular gene pool. There's no evidence that once you go outside a gene pool that you're going to be able to have an animal cross into another gene pool. I haven't seen any evidence for that.
But they haven't crossed gene pools. We're in the same gene pool. It's just microevolution leading to a macroevolution that has led to the evolution of ape into man. And matter of fact, you can look at man now and see that we're still evolving, except it's now in a technology sense. I mean, evolution is still occurring. How can you deny it altogether?
I didn't.
But you
I said Genesis opens the door, never answers the question, what process did God use to create? I clearly pointed out that many followers of Christ, like Francis Collins, the head of the Human Genome Project, who's a devout follower of Christ, believes in evolution as a process, but not as an origin.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, earlier when you talked about the canonization of the Bible,
Yes.
you mentioned, was it Orthodox was one of their
Yes.
What exactly does that word Orthodox mean? Just because I
You
hear
bet.
it a lot, but I don't know what it means.
Holding to the teachings of the apostles, holding to the teachings of the Old Testament. If a book, like the Gospel of Judas, like the Gospel of Thomas, like the Gospel of Pontius Pilate, if a book contradicted the apostles' record of what Jesus taught, if it contradicted the Old Testament, it was viewed as unorthodox out of the group of literature that agreed with the apostles' recollections of what Jesus taught. You see, the Gospel of Judas is a classic example of Gnosticism. Who's the hero in the Gospel of Judas? Judas Iscariot. Well, why is the guy who betrayed Christ the hero? Because the whole point of Gnosticism is you want to be free of your body. Your body is worthless. It drags you down. And so Judas Iscariot is the hero because Judas Iscariot helps Christ get crucified, which means he loses his body and his spirit is free. But you see, sir, that is in diametrical contradiction to what the apostles taught, to what Jesus taught, to what the Old Testament teaches. And that is why the Gospel of Judas was rejected from the New Testament canon.
What is the evidence?
Good question. What is the evidence for God or for Christ?
No, for Christianity, like the religion.
Well, sir, I don't think you'd be wise to put your faith in Christianity, the religion, because it's been used to justify the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials.
That's not what I'm saying. Like, okay, so you have the Bible, and it defines a way of living.
Jesus made ethical teachings like the Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
Defines ethics, yes, sir.
Yes. So like there is a certain way Christians live. Like they have different things that are sin. They have different things that they're called to do. They have like
Yes.
outside of the Bible. How do you get this system? Like, how do you like come to justify this system without using the Bible? So, like, for instance, premarital sex is sin. Now, like, how would you like justify that without the Bible?
That if you're going to marry a woman who's had many sex partners, the idea that just because she walks down an aisle out in nature and says she loves you and she's going to be committed to you, the evidence is she loves having sex with many different men. So why would you trust her that she's going to be committed just to you? Therefore, get ready to be burned.
Okay. So is that like...
Whereas, if the woman insisted that sex outside of marriage is wrong, the odds are, when she makes a commitment to you, she's not going to be looking for other men.
Okay.
So I'd say watch out about premarital sex if you're looking forward one day to having a relationship of commitment.
Right.
Now, if you're not looking forward to having a relationship of commitment, if you view sex as an open thing, and you can swap wives, girlfriends, it really doesn't matter, I would say watch out. You're going to be a very lonely, superficial person.
I wasn't like necessarily trying to like justify that. I was more like justifying that it's a sin, or like why is it wrong in God's eyes?
Well, if something's wrong in God's eyes, God's going to have to reveal that, right?
Right.
I'm not going to be able to figure that out.
Right.
And what Jesus Christ claimed is that he is God revealing what is good and what is evil.
Okay, now, but wouldn't you have to like say that using the proof that like he said it in the Bible, and that's where like that's what I'm saying is like the Bible says that it's right, and so like you're getting like, but it's circular. Like if something says that it's right, using itself, it's
How
like
are you going to find out about American history without reading an American history book? How are you going to find out about Muhammad without reading the Quran? How are you going to find out about Siddhartha Gautama Buddha without reading the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha? How are you going to find out about any historical person without reading the eyewitness accounts? Do you see what you're asking, sir?
yeah, thank you.
It's impossible for me to learn about Abraham Lincoln without reading U.S. history. It's impossible for me to learn about Napoleon without reading European history. And it's impossible for me to find out about Jesus Christ without reading the Gospels, the eyewitness account of how Jesus lived, what he taught, how he died, and how he rose from the dead. Yes, sir.
I'll ask another. One of my classmates, and I really disagreed with him a lot on this, but he said that moral decay and I guess better morality is somehow tied to education. What are your thoughts on that?
You bet. Sounds like a good Westerner. Sounds like a good white Westerner. I can't believe how many people think all religions are equally valid. And I don't have faith. Excuse me? Well, yeah, Cliff, all religions are equally valid. Really? That statement means that either there is no God, or God is an impersonal force who doesn't care what you think about him. And that is incredibly Western, white, Enlightenment thinking. It's a faith position. It's a worldview.
He made the claim that education was tied to morality. And I guess in terms that the more educated you are, the more enlightened you are.
You bet.
Somehow.
The more educated you are, the more moral you are.
Yeah.
H.G. Wells believed that. H.G. Wells saw World War I came along. H.G. Wells was convinced that World War I was the war to end all wars. But then H.G. Wells saw World War II come along, and he saw the most highly educated, highly technological nation of the world, Nazi Germany, perform some of the most horrible human atrocities imaginable. And H.G. Wells wrote a book called The Fate of Man. And in this book, H.G. Wells writes, "My faith in man and in education and in technology is bankrupt. For I have witnessed the return of organized torture by Nazi Germany. My faith is bankrupt. I respect him for his honesty." The idea that education is the basis of morality is a farce. For the question is, what are you going to use your good education to do? Blow up people or find a cure for cancer? See, so the question goes deeper. The question goes right back to, is there a God or is there not? If there is no God, morality is relative. So you create it in your intellectual ivory tower, on the streets of the inner city. You create what's right, you create what's wrong, and it's all relative. But if there is a God, and this God is good and just, and if this God gave you and me a conscience, then it means that justice is not a relative value. It's an objective moral value. And guess what? I am so glad that all my atheist friends have consciences that tie them into those moral absolutes. Because could you imagine living in a society filled with people who did not have a conscience? That would be scary. If I could murder and not feel any guilt, that would really be scary. Thanks for raising that issue.
If I were to say, unless you can scientifically prove something to me, then I won't believe it. Then this is my faith.
Yeah, that's your
But science is based on a series of tests to try to prove something. It's not a final answer. But it's more than saying, well, since I don't understand, then obviously, you know, I just don't know. That's stating something.
The statement, unless you can scientifically prove something it's not true, is a philosophy.
Is that a philosophy?
No, that would be empiricism. That's facts. Philosophy. If someone
I have another question. Earlier you were saying something about morality as a general being a proof for God. I didn't quite understand that. What if it's just a function of society?
If it's just a function of society,
Well, yeah, because
then
like,
morality
you know,
is relative.
hundreds of years ago, what was acceptable then is not necessarily acceptable now. Like in Rome, you could have slaughtered a good amount of people and have been alright, depending on who it was. Now you can't really do that. You know what I mean? So we have now certain laws that dictate, you know, it's not good to kill that amount of people. What up? That many people, you know what I mean? So I don't quite understand what you mean by a universal morality. I've never seen that to be true. I mean, like in a state of nature, right? If I was going after survival, I wouldn't have a problem maybe killing a guy to feed my children. Now, in society where there's law, that wouldn't be acceptable. You know that you have to treat your fellow human being a certain way so that society runs smoothly. So why is morality universal?
Do you believe that if Nazi Germany would have won World War II?
Everybody always brings up the Nazis. What is this?
What if you just said yes?
Man, I was trying to answer your
I'm
question.
sorry, I apologize. Go.
If Nazi Germany would have won World War II, would that mean that the Holocaust is good?
What? No.
That would never be that.
Okay, why is the Holocaust
That has
wrong?
nothing to do with that, though.
Why is the Holocaust wrong? Because it's immoral. Okay, who defines morality?
We're also speaking in a time frame now where we have law that also defines that kind of thing.
Where on earth do you get off saying that your particular laws of your culture are right and the Nazis are wrong? How on earth can you remain intact with your rational mind and say,
I'm saying
my morality is right of my culture, but the Nazis' morality is wrong? Why? Because I assert that my morality is right and the Nazis are wrong. If there is no God, morality is created by the individual, by society, which means it's totally relative. But if there is a God, then it's possible that there are some moral absolutes. But if there's no God, morality is all relative. Now, can we agree on that or not?
No.
Okay. What is the basis of a moral absolute if there is no God?
We don't know. It could have been an invisible hand process, like invented by an incredibly intelligent God who decided that we should develop a subjective process for ourselves.
You can't prove God doesn't exist, but you can't prove He exists either.
Yeah.
Which is the same exact ground I think we're holding, is that everything's relative. That man creates individually everything that has ever been created on this planet has been a product of that which man has created. You can't prove that a God made anything.
Can you prove anything in life?
You can't prove anything.
Thank you. Does that mean you just arbitrarily make decisions, or do you look for evidence?
Well, you have to take what you're given on this planet. I mean, everything you have around you, all the elements, all the forces that push you around, you make conclusions. I mean, I'm an engineer, and what I do is I take what I know, and I can make things, I can make machines, and I can try to benefit that which I have, but nothing's absolute ever.
Okay. So you base your decisions on evidence, not proof.
Exactly.
And the evidence is that God exists.
Why?
Everything that has a beginning has a cause. The universe has a beginning, therefore the universe has a cause.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you know?
You don't know either.
The Big Bang.
Really?
The Big Bang shows us the universe is not eternal, it has a beginning.
When did that happen? Big Bang?
Yeah, about 15 billion years ago. The evidence from astronomy is...
No, I agree that it happened, but I just...
Well, then why are you arguing with me about it?
Well, no, I'm not arguing with that. I mean, your stance is that everything's relative, or anything could happen, right?
No. If there is no God, morality is relative.
But if there is no God and morality is subject to label.
Second piece of evidence for God's existence is, you as an engineer know, that order and design does not come about by chance.
Evolution.
Well, the obvious question is there a mind behind evolution, or is there no mind?
Well, evolution states that things happen pseudo-randomly. I mean, how did life spawn out of a rock? Nothing, by chance.
That's another third piece of evidence for God's existence. Life does not come about from non-life by chance.
How do you know that?
Because my observation is that plant life comes from plant life, animal life comes from animal life, and human life comes from human life. It never once comes from non-life.
Not always, though. There are definitely logical systems where there's paraconsistency, where truth and falsity aren't mutually exclusive.
Like what?
Logical systems where that's the case, as opposed to instead of binary values where something is either false or true, that it could be true and false, or neither.
Okay, when can A and non-A be equally true in the same way at the same time?
If you write out the starred sentence is true, and you star that sentence, it's both true and false, or neither true nor false.
What?
Do you not? Alright, if I had some paper, I can show you. If I wrote out on a chalkboard, say, the starred sentence is false, and I starred it, then it's the starred sentence is false, but that makes the sentence true. But it's both true and false at the same time. Yes, it is.
What's the point you're trying to make?
That your logical system, your whole example there of a professor saying something is true and false being based on absolute is not right.
No, I put forward the law of non-contradiction. That A and non-A cannot both be true in the same way at the same time. You disagree with that?
It might not be true.
Well, I know that. I might be a bad dream you're having right now. Anything's possible.
Well, see, you throw
But
away
what does
like
the evidence point to? The evidence points to the law of non-contradiction being correct. The evidence points to you and me standing here having a conversation. And guess what you're using? The same thing I'm using. You're using speech and logic and reason to communicate with me.
Exactly, and you're using that to try and define a system when there isn't a whole lot of evidence for it. There is no evidence for a God.
Of course there's evidence that God exists. Order and design point to a designer.
Well, what about in evolution? How come that's not?
What about it?
How is that not?
Evolution has nothing to do with what I just said.
Yeah, you said order and design. All right, how about order and design in biology? And there, you take theories like creationism and intelligent design, and those are all negative evidence theories where they have no positive evidence for them, only small problems in evolution to back them up.
Sure, evolution is just a process, so the question still remains, is there an intelligent mind behind the process, or is there no intelligent mind behind the process?
You're right, but it's not necessitated. Evolution doesn't necessitate an intelligent designer, so that's, once again, your evidence is poor, I would say.
Well, fine. If you believe that designer genes don't have a designer behind them, if you believe that a BMW can come together as a result of a cyclone passing through a metal scrapyard, if you believe that oxygen, which is 21% of our atmosphere, if it was 25%, fires would break out all over the place. If it was 15%, we'd all suffocate. If you think that that kind of complexity can come about by chance,
absolutely,
I got to tell you, I can't be so gullible. Because everything in my experience is order and design and complexity of that nature demands an intelligent mind.
So you're saying there's no chance ever? That there's no chance for
anything's possible. It's possible I'm a bad dream you're having, okay? But the evidence is I'm real, the evidence is you're real. That's why we're continuing this conversation. This is why I am. So I don't base my life on proof, but I base my life on evidence. And the evidence is, sir, you don't get complexity by chance. You don't get intelligent communication by chance. It demands an intelligent mind. The amount of DNA in a single cell demands a creator. How can you have so much densely packed information without an intelligent mind?
I feel like it's just someone who can't comprehend.
That's the argument from incredulity. Basically, you don't know how it could happen, so you say God must have done it.
No, there was an argument from experience. If I'm walking down the beach and I see ripples in the sand, and you ask me, hey dude, how'd the ripples get there? And I say the waves did it.
Experience.
If we keep on walking down and we see John loves Mary written in the sand, and you say, hey dude, how'd that get there? And I say, because the waves made it. That's absurd. Why? Because John loves Mary is qualitatively different from ripples in the sand. I have seen life come from life. Never once have you or I seen life come from non-life. An atheist and agnostic is saying life can come from non-life. There is not one observation of that by anybody. But you still believe it. That's blind, gullible faith.
Dude, sir.
I can't have that much faith.
Sir.
I only see life come from life. I never see life come from non-life. That's why it's far more reasonable for me to believe in the beginning a living being, a creator, than it is reasonable for me to believe in the beginning non-life.
If man has free will and is able to make decisions on his own, for instance, I made a decision to talk to you right now.
Right.
Now God is infallible without fault. He doesn't see time as a same conquest as us. It's like an open book for him.
Right.
Sees everything as one plane. So he already knows I'm going to make my decision to talk to you.
Yep.
So in reality, this is something that's already been planned out. God already knows which way I'm going, what I'm going to say to you, which way I'm going to turn.
Yep.
So in reality, man doesn't have free will because this is something that God already knows and understands to be planned.
Good question. Very hard question. When we say that God is all-knowing, we do not mean that God writes on a piece of paper what you and I are going to do tomorrow, locks it in a bank vault, and then you and I have to do what's on the paper tomorrow.
Right.
Instead, what we mean is, due to God's perspective outside of the dimension of time, God is eternal. God is not locked into the dimension of time the way you and I are.
Right.
He is in a position to see what you and I will freely choose tomorrow.
Right, but isn't that contradictory? Isn't that a circular logic? For instance, if God knows where I'm going to end up right now in 10 years, would you agree that God knows right now where I'm going to be in 10 years?
Right.
He can see that.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
Yep.
Okay. So any decisions that I make up until that point to get me where I'm going to be in 10 years have already been knowledgeable to God, because he could drop back and say from 5 years he's going to be in here, from 5 minutes he's going to be here, and 1 second he's going to be here.
Right.
So in reality, although we comprehend our own free will, this is something that's already understood by God. So if God really is infallible and without fault, then man doesn't have free will.
God is omnipresent, which means God can be in Storrs, Connecticut and Calcutta, India at the same time.
Right.
Why? Because God is outside of the dimension of space. He's not limited by space.
Right.
Which means God does not have a torso, a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
Because he is outside of the dimension of space, God can be in Calcutta, India, London, England, and Storrs, Connecticut at the same time.
Right.
Similarly, because God is outside of the dimension of time, God is eternal.
Okay.
God looks at all of history at a glance. Therefore, due to his perspective outside of time, God sees what you and I will freely choose to do tomorrow.
But so he knows what we're going to do.
Because he's outside
I understand
of the
that, but I'm just
dimension of time.
Right, so there's a entity, which we will call God. Now I'm not trying to put it into a human form, we'll call this entity God. So this godly form knows where we're going to be, like you said, in any time, in any place, and any space. So in reality, actions we make here are not free will, but they're actions that are already understood by God. He knows if I'm going to talk to you or if I'm not going to talk to you. And by knowing that, doesn't that take away man's free will altogether?
No. If I watch a movie twice,
I understand.
and if I see the actions in the second time I watch the movie, and I know what he's going to do next, I knew what Dustin Hoffman or Tom Cruise or Liam Neeson is going to do next, it doesn't mean that I'm forcing him to do it.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying he's forcing you to do it. I'm saying, but all I'm saying is that wouldn't any decision we make or any action we make on earth already be known by God? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So although that we have the free will, as you would say, to make those decisions, aren't those decisions by already being known in reality not really free will? We're not making this decision of where we're going to go because this is already predestined to where we're going to end up.
Okay. I can watch my little child reach out to touch a red hot stove.
Yeah.
I know that when that finger touches that red hot stove, it's going to recoil in pain.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I know that doesn't mean I am making the child touch the red hot stove and get burned.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Just because I have knowledge that something's going to happen does not mean that I'm forcing it to happen.
Okay. I understand what you're saying.
What do you think about Christ?
I really don't want to get into the whole thing. To tell you the truth, I think I just, like he said, I follow a lot of basic Christian Catholic values. I think that I'm taking my own free will to kind of make different decisions. I've read a lot of the Bible. There are some things that I just couldn't comprehend. All-powerful, loving God to think with some other people. I believe that humans are all equal. I think that we all do have flaws, obviously, like you said. But I think that with God, if there is a God, I believe there is, being all loving nature, that He wouldn't necessarily want us to, Leviticus 20:13, have the blood of a homosexual man spew across the land. I don't necessarily think that would be a loving God's nature.
Good. And so Jesus didn't do that, did he?
Oh, I'm not saying he did, no, but
right.
Jesus is the Son of God, and in reality, Jesus would be the equivalent of God, if you have that.
Good. So you believe that Jesus was God?
I'm saying if he was, I'm saying. He would have to be. If he's the Son of God, he would have to be God. One and the same entity.
One and the same thing.
Right.
And doesn't his resurrection from the dead point to him being God?
Not necessarily.
I think that if everything in the Bible is correct, then I think that without a doubt, yeah, he would be one with God, definitely.
Okay.
It's like water, steam.
So do you think the historical evidence point to Christ having risen from the dead?
I think there's definitely historical evidence in the area, but like I'm saying, I believe that the Bible was written by man. I think that man is at fault. So I don't think that taking everything in the Bible as absolute truth is necessarily what a God that would give us free will would want us necessarily to do.
Okay, so what test do you use to determine what parts of the Bible are accurate and what parts are inaccurate?
I don't put it to a test at all. I tell you, if it was going to be put to a test, I think it'd be my own gut moral instinct. And if I am taking the test of my own gut and moral instinct, and God has created me, then I guess I'm doing something right.
Good, so you're on the right path. But I think that we can get downright brilliant when it comes to rationalizing whatever we want to do. So I think it's pretty healthy if God has given us a plumb line that we can measure our consciences, our gut with. Like the Ten Commandments, like the Sermon on the Mount. And if you really are wanting to know truth, and if you really believe that God exists, it's well worth our time to search after him. Jesus said, ask and it shall be given you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door shall be open. For everyone who asks receives. He who seeks finds, and him who knocks the door shall be open. If you spend 4 years here at this fine university, preparing for at most a 60-year career, don't you think it'd be wise to study a bit in preparation for eternity?
I have a question for you. What do you believe of people who believe in other religions? Do you think when they die, how do you think they will be judged?
I have to divide that question into two parts. What about those who've heard about Christ? What about those who've not heard about Christ? Jesus never answers the question, how is God going to judge those who never heard about Christ? So I don't know. But Jesus and the Bible make 5 points that apply to that issue. God is just. Nobody's getting ripped off. The only reason people go to hell is because they choose to live their life separate from God, and on the day of judgment, God grants their request. Thirdly, there are going to be a truckload of people in heaven who never heard the word Jesus. Hebrews chapter 11 lists some of these people by name. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Rahab, a Gentile prostitute. Never heard the word Jesus, but in humility, they put their faith in God. Fourthly, The only reason those folks will be in heaven, the only reason any of us will be in heaven, Christ claimed, is because he bled and died on a cross to pay the penalty for our wrongdoing. And fifthly, although I do not know specifically how God will judge those who have never heard about Christ, I do know that all of us here have more than ample opportunity to read the Gospels, to decide what are we going to do with Christ.